Good evening, everyone. Hello, can I have your attention, please? Good evening, everybody. Hello. Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to LSE. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to have so many of you here joining us this evening, so thank you. I'm Hussein Naji. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health Policy and director of the Pharmaceutical Policy Lab here at the LSE. Before I kick off the main event of the evening and properly introduce our speakers and discussant, I just want to run through a few quick housekeeping items with you. The event is being filmed and live streamed, and we do hope that a recording will be available in podcast form, barring any technical glitches. We'll take questions at the end of the discussion. And if you have any questions during the Q&A, please raise your hand and wait for the microphone to reach you so that everyone in the auditorium can actually hear you, as well as those joining online. And we'll also be monitoring the questions coming from the online audience. If you're posting on social media, please do use the LSE Health hashtag for those posts. And if you haven't done so already, please silence your phones now. And now onto the main event of the evening. So we're here tonight for the event titled Pharmaceutical Policy at a Crossroads, Perspectives from Europe and the US. I hope a timely conversation about evidence, regulation, uncertainty surrounding pharmaceuticals. The event is organized as part of the 30th anniversary of LSE Health, which is one of the largest research centers at the LSE. Established in 1995, LSE Health mission is to produce research-based knowledge and promote evidence-informed policies to shape a healthier, fairer, and more prosperous world. And we thank LSE Health for sponsoring this evening's event. Tonight also marks the launch of the Pharmaceutical Policy Lab. And this is an international research collaboration hosted within LSE Health that is dedicated to evaluating, informing, and shaping pharmaceutical policies worldwide. And at the Pharmaceutical Policy Lab, our mission is simple but ambitious. We strive to maximize the benefits and minimize the harms of medicines for patients, for health systems, and for societies. And at the Pharmaceutical Policy Lab, we're committed to rigorous science that supports informed decision-making across the entire spectrum, going from pharmaceutical development to use, going from research and development to clinical trials, regulatory approval, health technology assessment, pricing and reimbursement, prescribing, and use. And although we are formally launching the lab today, we have already an established track record of impactful publications, scientific publications, as well as reports that you can find on our website. And I'm so pleased to be launching the Pharmaceutical Policy Lab with an amazing group of collaborators. The co-founders of the lab are Anita Wagner from Harvard, Stephen Woloshin from Dartmouth, Beth Woods from York, James Lomas from York, Christine Leopold from Utrecht, Courtney Davis from King's College London, and Maximilian Salcher-Conrad from the National Public Health Institute in Austria. Now you have their faces. Please stop them and say hello at the end of the event. You will not be disappointed. And beyond this core team, we're really fortunate to collaborate with researchers across LSE from different departments, faculty members, doctoral researchers, postdoctoral fellows, as well as collaborators from the US, from the EU, and China. And to mark this important occasion, we could not think of more fitting speakers, leaders who share the lab's ethos of rigorous science and policy impact. Tonight, first, we'll hear from Dr. Felusio Agbula, who's the Senior Vice President of Research at the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review, ICER, based in the United States. In her role, Dr. Agboola provides methodological guidance on health technology assessments and manages the broader health technology assessment process in a really unique landscape that is the US healthcare system. Afterwards, we'll hear from Dr. Beate Wiesler, head of the Department of Drug Assessment at the German Institute for Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare, IQWiG, which is Germany's health technology assessment agency. At IQWiG, Dr. Wiesler is responsible for the scientific assessment of pharmaceuticals, development of assessment methods, and the Institute's collaboration with German and international partners. Currently, Dr. Wiesler is also the chair of the Methodological and Procedural Guidance Subgroup of the European HTA Coordination Group, one of the most significant developments in European pharmaceutical policy over the last decade. Our discussant tonight is Professor Emily Jackson from LSE's Law School. Professor Jackson is an expert on medical law, including pharmaceuticals. She's written several textbooks on the subject. She's a fellow of the British Academy, and in 2017, she was awarded an OBE for services to higher education. With that, Dr. Agboola, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again, Hussein, for the introduction, and congrats on the launch of the Pharmaceutical Lab. I'm excited to be part of the conversation. Okay, I don't think that's the start of my slide presentation. Sorry, this is not the start of my...
Is that missing?
Yes, it is missing a lot. Okay.
Actually, in a different order.
Yeah. All right, those are the first couple of slides.
Where are your slides?
Yeah. Yeah, all of this is correct, but it's like 5 slides missing.
Is there anything else on the...
Yeah, 5 slides missing.
It's still on that pile. This is all we've got. I'm sorry, we don't have anything. This is just what we got sent. Yeah.
Okay.
I apologize. Sorry about that.
All right. That's fine.
Okay.
I will talk through the first couple of slides.
Okay.
Hopefully I remember what they are. It's okay, we'll be fine. So the first couple of slides is just to provide a background of the US context. And couple of background is the US healthcare system, to think about it, is decentralized and pluralistic. And what I mean by that is we have a mix of private and public payers. Decision making in US healthcare system is also spread across different levels, federal, state, and private organization. There is also no control of lunch price when it comes to, do you have my slides? Yes. Thank you, printed. Thank you so much. There's no formal restriction on manufacturer lunch price or price increases over time in the US. But we are innovation hub. According to the 2024 World Index of Healthcare Innovation, the US ranked first in scientific advancement by significant margin. And this largely stems from US leadership in the number of new drugs and medical devices that are gaining regulatory approval per year. But what does that translate into as we think about the idea of no gatekeeper? The first reality is, relative to the size of its economy, the US spends much more on healthcare than other high-income countries. The second reality is, how does this translate into health? Is that the US has the lowest life expectancy among the large, wealthy countries, while far outspending them on healthcare. And the third reality is that the research shows that Americans face the most barriers to access and affordability on healthcare. And so although the US was ranked #1 in scientific advancement by the 2024 World Index of Healthcare Innovation, it ranked number 32, which is the worst score in fiscal sustainability. So the challenge really is, how do we balance innovation, access, and affordability? So now I have my slides. And it's in this background that ISA operates in the US. And who are we? ISA is an independent health technology assessment organization that develops publicly available value assessment reports that examines the comparative effectiveness and cost effectiveness of various healthcare interventions. And so basically what ISA does is produce this report as a public good. We have no formal authority, but we put it out there for different payers, both public and private, to be able to pull ISA report and use it as a form of negotiation as they interact with manufacturers. So ISA's HTA activities are funded by nonprofit foundations. And we are this group of nerds that believe that there are ways in which we can use evidence in a transparent way to align the prices with the benefits for patients and families. And that's what we mean when we say fair price. And we believe that if we do this, we would be able to improve access and affordability for patients while we continue to retain the necessary incentives that are necessary for future innovation. And that's what we mean by fair price and future innovation. And how did ISA get here? We came into the picture in 2006. It was founded as a research program at Harvard Medical School, and the idea was for it to be a laboratory for health technology appraisal in the US. And at that time, we sought to answer questions related to how we can efficiently spend the limited healthcare dollars we had. And the focus was on health technologies and services. In 2014, the focus shifted to drugs because we did this report on the potential budget impact of the new treatment for hepatitis C, while we were saying it's good value, but short term, we cannot afford this. And our report got a lot of attention. And this also gave us a lot of funding from different nonprofit foundations that wanted us to do this more. And so we began our emerging therapy assessment and pricing program, where we focused more on drugs since 2015. Also at that time, we released our value assessment framework, which we call a uniform approach on how we actually evaluate drugs. And over the years, we have revised this value assessment framework, and each year we do about 10 conditions per year, and each condition may have a number of drugs we're evaluating, focusing on new therapies that are coming down the pipeline of FDA approval. So the idea of ISA's value assessment framework has this goal at the center of it. It's the fair price and fair access and future innovation. And the first thing we're focused on is answering the question around what is the long-term value as we have this new intervention. And in answering that question, we build it on the foundation of first asking the question around what is the comparative clinical effectiveness of this new intervention as we compare it to the current standard of care, asking the net benefit in terms of the benefit and the harms. And when we build on top of that and looking at the total cost, including the cost offset, we also ask the question, cost effectiveness. But recognizing that there are things that we may not always be able to capture, perhaps in the clinical trial evidence, or as we look at the cost effectiveness, ISA often always looks at what we call benefit beyond health. And these are other things, maybe because the drug is given as an oral therapy that is quite convenient to patients, and this really matters to patients. We also look at things we call special social or ethical priorities, which may be, maybe this condition is occurring in a group of patients that have quite unmet need, and it's really important that as a society, we may decide we want to pay more for this group of patients. We also ask the question, the short-term affordability, and what the potential budget impact of this new therapy would look like. ISA's work from topic selection to final report usually takes about 8.5 to 9 months. It's interesting, a lot of people don't know that ISA is actually a small organization. We have about 40 core employees, even though we have a number of academic collaborators across the countries that we also work with. Ultimately, the questions we're evaluating in ISO report when we're talking about the long-term value for money is how well does this new intervention work as we compare to the standard of care? And how much should we pay based on the clinical benefit it provides to patients? Are there domains of value that should be considered than those that are core to clinical trial evidence and the cost-effectiveness modeling? Once we do our report, we always try to bring stakeholders together in a public setting where we appraise this evidence and our appraisal committee get to vote on it. But we also bring different stakeholders to be able to answer this last question. Are there important policy recommendations that we have to then give on how best to apply the evidence and additional considerations to clinical practice, pricing, and insurance coverage policies? Like I mentioned, ICER is a nonprofit organization and has no formal authority for us to enforce this. There are often research out there that shows that a lot of payers use ICER's work. And one of the questions we were asking this year as we released a report called Launch Price and Access is to say, okay, great, they're using our report. How is the health benefit price benchmark that ICER suggests translates into the net pricing decisions? And here's what we found. Approximately 70% of ICER assessed treatments that are approved between 2022 to 2024, the ones we looked at, had a net price above what ICER suggested is what we should be paying in terms of value. And here would be the additional discounts that would still be needed for us to meet that. One of the things we evaluated in the report is how does this translate into what we are paying in terms of the excess spending? We estimated that the excess spending from 1 year post-approval alone of just this 15% of drugs translates into $1.3 to $1.5 billion just from 1 year spend alone. And there is always an opportunity cost. In the US, as prices go up, what happens is those prices get passed on to enrollees and as premium increases. But what also happens then is some people then drop out of health insurance and are not able to afford health insurance. And so we estimated what is the opportunity cost of just these few drugs that we had evaluated, not all drugs, 1 year and the excess spend. We estimated that between $97,000 to $115,000 insurance loss in 1 year from this excess spend. So here's the reality of doing HTA in the US. One is that ICER is non-governmental with no formal authority. And that comes with its challenges. It's that we have to find funding from sources that strengthen our independence from industry. The weight of industry criticism of our work can also be intense. And without statutory power, it blunts the impact when payers cannot walk away. They can just negotiate, but they cannot walk away. But there are also advantages to the fact that we're non-governmental. It's the fact that we're nimble to evolve our methods and to adapt quickly. We have freedom from governmental interference, which enhances our independence. And ICER has the odd distinction of being a private organization with an operational monopoly over formal HTA in the US. But the implication of this for our work is that every part of the process for us is really essential. For people to consider ICER as the authority, we have to be free from conflicts of interest. Our evaluation has to be rigorous, and we have to integrate every part of HTA into our process. But it also means that in addition to providing information and a forum for deliberation, we have to work to evolve the ecosystem for application of HTA in the US. And so you would often find us in speaking engagement, and we are talking about why we should be using HTA for many of the things we're doing. The second reality of pharmaceutical policy in the US is that of HTA in the US is that the pharmaceutical policy right now is a moving target. There's a lot happening. In the last couple of years, this Inflation Reduction Act came into play, which was signed into law in 2022, after decades of debate on whether the federal government should be able to negotiate at all. And now it came into law, and it now empowers CMS to be able to negotiate for a select high-cost drugs. Again, just talking about few drugs, not at launch, after a few years that they've been on the market. We've probably, I'm sure a number of us have been reading in the news about the most favored nation pricing. It's the idea of bringing reference prices to the US. There's lots of fear, there's very few details. Will industry exit out of markets? Some companies have agreed to this deal. What does it really mean? We don't really know yet. Will they be lowering? Will this help in terms of prices in the US, or will it just raise prices overseas? Or maybe none of this will matter. We're still watching. And the tariff. In exchange for tariff reprieve, there are a number of manufacturers that have cut deals with Trump to lower prices by adopting the MFN, the most favored nation pricing. We also heard in the last couple of weeks, the US and UK, that there's been a drug price and tariff deal, which ultimately led to increase in the cost effectiveness threshold for NICE. There's the Trump RX, which is this idea of farm to table that's been being talked about a lot in the US. And there's the idea of getting rid of the middleman in the US, where pharmaceutical companies can sell directly to patients. Despite the attention this is getting in news, it's unlikely to fundamentally change the drug pricing dynamics in the US. And that's because a lot of patients finance their drugs through insurance, and what they're going to get through this direct drug buying channel is going to be more expensive than what they would pay with their insurance. There's the National Priority Review. This is the idea of FDA shortening the timeline for actually reviewing a drug for a number of different criteria. And one of the stated goals here is to increase affordability. What that means is also not clear, and how this will be implemented. And the third reality is the evolving regulatory standard. There's been an exciting wave of innovation, but the evolving regulatory standards for faster approval of new pharmaceutical products, particularly for rare or serious conditions with significant unmet needs, continues to be a problem. Often this type comes with noble intention to speed access to new therapies for patients with serious conditions. But it's getting harder and harder to distinguish what real innovation is that has substantial benefit to something that has no benefit because it's perhaps approved on surrogate outcome, which we don't know how it translates into clinical benefit for patients. And so there's gap is widening between the evidence that is needed for HTA and the evidence we actually have available, particularly for rare or serious conditions with significant unmet need, or maybe for all conditions. As of last week, news came out that FDA is about to lower the number of trials that are required for drug approval from 2 to 1. But even when the FDA required 2 trials, it has become increasingly flexible. In 2024, 70% of the drug approved were based on 1 clinical trial in the US. And so how well can we answer this question when we are saying a core part of HTA is how well does the intervention work compared to the standard of care? ICE uses this evidence matrix that helps us to answer the question around the comparative net health benefit and the level of certainty in the evidence we have. And more, we are finding ourselves in the high category, which is insufficient evidence. And so how do we address this? How does ICE make recommendation at launch in the face of uncertainty? One, like I said, a judgment of insufficient evidence. But what does that really mean if the drug is already FDA approved? There's going to be a drug, there's going to be a price, unless we suggest maybe we should not pay for it until we have enough evidence. So oftentimes we're left to doing exploratory cost effectiveness analysis, where we have to discuss the uncertainty and the controversies in the clinical evidence, and the impact on modeled results. Oftentimes producing what we call the alternative model structures and assumptions, and exploration of different conservative or optimistic model variations if we believe the evidence we're seeing. ICE has what we call ICE Analytic Platform, where we make the model available and we have certain inputs that we can toggle as evidence become more certain. So in summary, how can HTA be a guide on this journey? There is no easy answer, in the US at least. But we keep doing the work, bringing a clear and dispassionate view of evidence, evolving methods if and when needed, and keeping patients at the center of it at all times. And we have to remember that we are guides on a journey. The idea is to be able to use evidence for decision making, not combatants that are seeking to win. Thank you.
Yes. Good evening, also from my side. Thank you very much for this invitation and congratulations for starting the Policy Lab. I'm already looking forward to your publications out of this work. This certainly will be interesting reading. So I today would like to talk about the latest development in European HTA, or one of the important steps we are currently going, and that is the introduction of a European joint clinical assessment of drugs and medical devices. The European HTA regulation came into effect in January 2022, and since January of this year we have started doing assessments, and I will also explain what we did in the time between. So I will very briefly explain what the regulation means. We'll speak about the status of its implementation, and we'll then talk about what these joint clinical assessments of health technologies will mean for the European landscape. I will briefly touch upon the evidence requirements of the procedure and come to some conclusions. So the regulation has 4 pillars. In principle, we are aiming to do joint clinical assessments of drugs, medical devices, and in vitro diagnostic devices. The second pillar is a joint scientific consultation, that is a scientific advice that is given by the HTA bodies across Europe or by the HTA bodies together with the regulator, with EMA. The third topic is horizon scanning, that is meant to inform healthcare systems of the things to come so that they can prepare their systems. And then there also is a fourth one called voluntary cooperation. Part of the aim of the European HTA regulation also has been to improve the collaboration between European HTA bodies, and this voluntary cooperation is supporting this aim, but this also allows to go beyond the topics I mentioned earlier. So in principle, we can also collaborate, for example, on cost effectiveness, which isn't included in the joint clinical assessment so far. Having said that, I must say that we are so busy with implementing the whole thing that there is no idea of voluntary cooperation on any additional topics right now. I today would like to focus on the joint clinical assessment of medicinal products, just to not get distracted with all the difficulties that come up with other products or with joint scientific consultations. So what is the aim of this HTA regulation besides improving the collaboration between European HTA bodies? One of the aim very obviously is to avoid duplication of work. So Currently, health technology developers submit dossiers to 27 member states, and there is the aim that only one evidence dossier has to be submitted at the European level, and then that all national systems could use this evidence, and this obviously would avoid duplication and save resources. At the same time, it is clear that across Europe, not all member states have developed their health technology assessment to the same level. So another objective is to indeed provide all member states with high-quality HTA reports in a timely manner. Also those member states which might currently, which might currently not have sufficient resources to do that on their own for all medicinal products. And then there is a very far-going goal that says this regulation should ensure that all patients in Europe have timely access to new drugs. And I will a little bit focus on that later on and look at the evidence on how the current situation is in Europe with access to new drugs, and discuss to what extent the joint clinical assessment will change this situation. What is the research question we are trying to answer in a joint clinical assessment? And this is very basic, actually. We are looking at the relative effectiveness and safety of the new drug versus a comparator, which is a standard of care in the different member states. And in addition, we are supposed to describe the degree of certainty of these relative effects. And this is a rather factual description of the evidence available answering this question. And we are not judging any of that, so we are not providing any value judges. We are not even combining all the positive and negative effects into one conclusion about whether this has an added benefit or not. We are just describing the relative effects and handing that over to the member states. That was a politically very important step to ensure that this guidance was possible, because member states didn't want to let go their responsibilities for decision making in their healthcare systems and their pricing and reimbursement decision, which are based on the final decision on what value this drug has in their healthcare systems. And I think that is a step well taken, because the same drug can have very different value in different healthcare systems, and we will come back to that later. So that is, in principle, relatively simple question we are trying to answer when we are doing a joint clinical assessment on a new drug. What is the timeline of that? Actually, the European joint clinical assessment runs in parallel to the regulatory procedure at EMA. Once a health technology developer has submitted a new drug for assessment at EMA, we take the claimed indication for this process. We build an assessment scope from this claimed indication and hand that over to the health technology developer, who is then tasked with preparing a dossier on our questions. We assess this dossier, endorse it in the HTA coordination group, which is the committee of member states. So that is a decision that is then taken by all member states together, and then we hand this report over to national procedures, to the member states. And the wording in the regulation is that member states then take due consideration of this report, which of course also was part of the negotiation of this regulation. So it's not mandatory to use that report in any specific way. Of course, there will be an evaluation, what happens with all these reports, but currently there is a a wide flexibility of how member states can use that, and it will be very interesting to see how member states use that and how this evolves over time. I would like to point out one thing that is, from the fact that this is running in parallel to the regulatory procedure, a consequence is that the evidence we need for the HTA has to be available at the point of submission to the regulator. So you can't afford to wait until the end of the regulatory procedure to generate the evidence, because then the assessment is done. And that potentially has consequences also for drug development programs which would need to consider HTA requirements. So what did we do from 22 to 25? We have set up the European system. So the HTA regulation was available in January 22, and there were 6 additional implementing regulations which have been developed over these 3 years. The last one was only endorsed in November. And we have set up a governance structure. The principal structure was laid down in the regulation, but of course this had to be kind of filled with life. So the decision-making body at the European level is the member state coordination group consisting of 27 member states plus Iceland plus Norway. And this coordination group has 4 subgroups, 2 for the products, the joint clinical assessment and the joint scientific consultation, 1 for the horizon scanning called emerging health technologies subgroup, and then there is a methodological and procedural guidance subgroup which, as the name says, develops all the methods and procedures to be used in this under this regulation. In principle, there are 2 configurations in each subgroup and in the coordination group, 1 for medicinal products and 1 for medical devices. So far, we have worked together because we felt that actually both types of health technologies should be handled the same. There is a secretariat by the European Commission supporting the process. There is an IT platform on which we are working, and setting up an IT platform in an international environment also is a kind of an adventure. And then there is very important also a stakeholder network, which includes patient organizations, clinician organizations, academic groups, and industry. We are meeting with this network from the coordination group side twice a year in full-day meetings. And I must say that the stakeholder network is very active. Specifically, patient organizations, but also clinicians' organizations are putting many resources into that. They feel that this is a regulation where they can kind of contribute and shape healthcare across Europe. We have then, with this governance structure, developed the guidance documents on methods, on processes. We have developed templates for the dossier. We have done an awful lot of communication. So the stakeholder network meetings is one type of communication. The Commission has organized regional meetings across Europe, 6 or 7 for 3 or 4 member states across Europe, to inform stakeholders within the member states of the new regulation and the aims. And we are regularly, once monthly, doing webinars for health technology developers or for patient groups and clinicians to provide information on the process. And there are also conferences. We have set up the IT platform, and we also had to build an consortium of the HTA agencies across Europe to ensure the financing of the assessments from money provided by the Commission. We started in January 2025. Since then, by today, 12 procedures have started. There is a staggered introduction. We start with oncology products and ATMPs. In 2028, we will do the remaining orphans, and in 2030, all remaining other medicinal products. That is the current status. And if we look at the content, the assessment scope turns out to be a very important point in this regulation. That actually is the starting point. We are defining our questions, and we are defining the question for this assessment from 27 member states plus Iceland and Norway. The starting point is a policy question of the member states that is relatively similar across member states. So most member states want to know how a new drug relates to what they already have available, but based on the healthcare system and also on their legal frameworks that can look different. This policy question is translated into a scientific format, the PICO, and the regulation says that this must be inclusive and meet the requirements of the member states, meaning of all member states. I think in the beginning there was the idea of the one European PICO. That turned out to be unrealistic, obviously. Then there was a discussion whether we could actually afford and achieve to answer 27 PICOs. Obviously we don't want to answer 27 PICOs. We are hoping for a lower number. But the regulation is very clear in that if a member state needs a specific question and PICO, we have to include that in the assessment scope and answer it. And this assessment scope then forms the basis for the dossier. So the health technology developer has to provide a systematically compiled evidence for these questions. And that is then also used in the assessment report. We are looking at the data availability and then at the relative effects and the certainty of these effects. Unfortunately, I can't give you any details on the ongoing project because everything is so confidential until we publish that. But we have done PICO exercises in the preparatory period to understand how this will work. And I can show you an outcome of one of these exercises. That was a drug in hepatocellular carcinoma, first-line treatment, and the intervention was durvalumab monotherapy. So we would receive that indication from the submission to EMA, and then we asked member states actually what is a question you would like to ask. For this full population, there was a request for four different comparators, and here we already see one characteristic that turns out to be very important. So European ESMO guidance suggests immunotherapy in this situation. There is an overall survival benefit of this therapy as compared to the older treatment, sorafenib and lenvatinib. However, immunotherapy is not available across Europe. There is a large number of countries that don't have these therapies. For these countries, there's a different question. They want to compare durvalumab monotherapy to sorafenib and lenvatinib. And that is their question, and that is a valuable question because it is reflecting their information need in their healthcare systems. So that means that in these full population, we have 4 research questions that would require 4 data sets. Then there were also member states who wanted to know how this drug would actually work in subpopulations that are subpopulations according to severity of disease. It might be that they would only want to reimburse in part of the population, and then these subpopulation data become important. So again, these were the comparators for the subpopulation. You see that in the more severe patient, also new treatments become relevant, and so this picture then shows the information need of European healthcare systems on this one drug in this one indication, and this is reflecting the situation in European healthcare. It shows that we have different approaches to reimbursement. It shows that we have different availability of new drugs, which is reflected here. And you may remember that one of the aim of the regulation is to make all new drugs available to all patients across Europe very quickly. We are not there. We are seeing this here. And the question is now, will this converge? Yeah, that is the question we will need to answer over the next years. The outcomes that were agreed by all member states, a wide range of outcomes: overall survival, PFS and response rate, quality of life, adverse events. Not all member states were interested in adverse events. I think all member states were interested in quality of life. Maybe the specific data would be different for a member state doing cost effectiveness based on utility versus a member state doing a clinical assessment. We probably would want to see different questionnaires. We will also see how this develops. And I would like to briefly look into this situation that is reflected in this PICO. So this PICO is not a consequence of the regulation. This PICO is just becoming transparent because of the regulation. The situation becomes transparent. And there is ample evidence about the differences in access to new treatments across Europe. This is just one analysis by the European Manufacturers Organization, the so-called weight indicator. From my point of view, this is incomplete in its information and results in a kind of simplified narrative. It says that across member states, the excess is very different, gets longer and longer and longer to the right side of the graph, and this is due to the HTA procedure. And we will have a few more data on that. What you see below the upper graph, that is actually the number of oncology drugs that are available in the different countries, and you see that there is a wide variety across Europe. So of the 56 drugs available in this oncology drugs from 20 to 23, the availability in member states is very different. And that actually is an unfortunate situation, and we want to change that, and it is an aim of this regulation to change that. The question is, how do we get there? This, I think, is a more complete picture of the situation. First of all, again, on the left-hand side, we see that the number of drugs, and this is a longer time period, therefore the numbers are higher, is different in member states. And then you see that the time to market access is not just due to the HTA process. It's also due to the fact that the submission for reimbursement is quite different across Europe. So we have a variety in reasons why treatments come to certain countries later, and we would need to look into that and try to change that. There is varying submission in total numbers, there's varying time to submission, and of course there's varying duration of HTA procedures. And the question is, will the joint clinical assessment change any of that? It might change the time, the duration of the assessment at the member state level, because they receive a first assessment. But then if you see that, for example, in Poland, it takes another 400 days before there is a submission for reimbursement, this report might well be outdated. And then you start from scratch. And but it could also be that health technology developers submit more fast because they have already prepared a dossier for all European countries. All these things will need to be researched, so I hope that part of these questions will be interesting also for the Policy Lab. Another point is also very interesting, I think, is that not all member states reimburse the entire indications. So there are member states who restrict the reimbursement to parts of the indication, and that might have different reasons. It could reflect an unmet need. So a member state might think that only, for example, the more severe patients have an unmet need, while for the less severe patients sufficient treatment is available. It might be used to limit uncertainty, so the data set might not be fit for purpose for part of the indication. It might just to the reason a measure to limit budget impact. So we have seen that with Sovaldi, that it was only reimbursed in smaller populations just to limit budget impact. Again, the question is, will the joint clinical assessment change any of that? It might limit uncertainty, but then budget impact will still remain an issue in the member states, and also the understanding of unmet need might differ. It might be a good reason for the member states on the left-hand side not to reimburse everybody if they see that why other member states are doing this approach. So there certainly will be more exchange about approaches across Europe. And then, of course, a very important question, will there be evidence to answer the PICO questions? As I said, the JCA will be conducted in parallel to the regulatory assessment. The evidence would need to be collected during drug development, but then HTA has been around for more than 25 years, so that is not really news. It's just that industry has not fully reacted on that. We have a wide range of methods we consider possible. We have, of course, direct comparisons from RCTs. We have indirect comparisons from RCTs, and we even have unanchored indirect comparisons. We, of course, will describe the uncertainties related to that, and what we also have described in our guidance is the data requirements for all these methods, because what we see specifically for comparisons of single-arm trials now is that very often the data used for this type of comparison are entirely insufficient to meet the methodological requirements. And we would hope that this also improves. And to what level, to what extent some data set is acceptable for decision making is decided at the national level. One interesting thing that has developed out of this implementing phase is that we have started, the HTA bodies have started discussing with EMA on methodological issues. We had a series of workshops with EMA, between HTA bodies and EMA, to discuss the challenges of evidence generation, just given that we will now assess in parallel. We do have a different remit, and everybody is very aware of that, and everybody wants to keep this different remit. However, we were discussing whether there would be potential solutions that could help both sides. We have published a position paper and will continue this discussion. And just a few appetizers from this position paper, and I will not go into detail because I'm over my time already anyway. So my conclusion is that while this regulation tries to have a joint clinical assessment across Europe, to meet the goal of informing national decision-making, and that is a goal. There is no decision-making at the European level. The decision-making, it is at the national level. And to enable that, the procedure should address the questions that come from the member states. And to what extent this then enables decision-making nationally will depend on the evidence that is available to answer those questions, and the differences in access to new drugs we are seeing across Europe and we want to overcome have different reasons, and the availability of this joint clinical assessment report will only solve some of these issues. The other issues have to be solved by other measures, other scientific measures, other policy measures, and I think it would be an interesting analysis and follow up on this regulation on what do we achieve? Do we achieve that? Do we generate all the other measures that need to be taken to meet the final goal? And therefore, there's an additional kind of conclusion. I think the introduction of European HTA itself is an intervention in the European healthcare systems, and we will have to see whether there is any benefit of that. From my experience from the introduction of such a procedure in the German system, I do expect that this will steer much debate. All these questions will become public, will be debated in public. There will be evidence on what is happening in healthcare systems, and I think this intervention has a chance to improve healthcare across Europe, and that is what I hope for. I've provided you some links for further information, the regulation itself, our guidance documents, and when you would like to have information on the ongoing JCAs, there also is a website that provides currently only a list of the projects we have started, but all the dossiers and all the reports will be published on the European website and are available then. And that's it from my side, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia and Beata, for incredibly insightful, informative papers. So before we open up for Q&A, both in the room and online, while you're all gathering your thoughts, I thought I'd just say a couple of words about the view from the UK, which is very different in relation to health technology assessments, because we've had a body at arm's length from government, National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, which has been carrying out binding health technology assessments, so a real difference there, for 26 years now, making some quite complex judgments about affordability. I'm old enough to remember pre-NICE days, and as a lawyer, what was really interesting then is there were quite a lot of cases in which patients would seek to judicially review negative funding decisions. Patients would take it upon themselves to try to challenge these on the grounds that the decision was irrational or it was so unreasonable that no reasonable funding body would make that choice. Those cases usually failed, and they've now largely disappeared because the weight of expertise and evidence that NICE uses in making its decisions is going to be extremely difficult to challenge them on rationality, because there's just so much expertise and evidence that goes into them. NICE has also been, I think, really successful in this country at depoliticising funding decisions. So I think we've been really fortunate in the UK for more than a quarter of a century to be able to benefit from this evidence-based, depoliticised, and I'll come back to that, HTA assessments, which I think have had widespread support. Now, of course, there are challenges, and a couple of them I'd like to pick up on in relation to things that Felicia and Beata said. So expedited approval, the lack of evidence for new medicines means doing robust cost effectiveness becomes harder and harder and harder if that evidence is weak or based on surrogate endpoints. The other thing that's really interesting is that unlike the European picture, NICE explicitly doesn't make comparative HTA decision, health technology assessment decisions. It's not saying, is this better than something else? It's saying, is this cost effective on its own? And that lack of comparison has led to problems. And Hussein's research, I think, has been really pivotal in pointing out that the health gains from a new medicine might not actually be as good as the health gains from the older medicine that it's supplanted. So that need for comparison is important. And I think NICE is increasingly itself seeking to take a whole life cycle approach to health technology assessments in order to not just confine what it does to the point of entry. And in the NHS 10-year plan for England, NICE is going to have a very specific role in de-investment decisions to try to take that more into account. Very expensive gene and cell therapies, AI and its new roles in relation to digital products pose additional challenges for NICE. And another issue is that in practice, often with these incredibly expensive medicines which exceed the cost-effectiveness threshold, the use of commercially sensitive, confidential funding arrangements with pharmaceutical companies, which are done in order to give patients access, but actually pose a real threat to openness and transparency that has otherwise been, I think, key to NICE assessments. It was mentioned already, but the fact that very recently NICE's cost-effectiveness thresholds can be raised as part of a trade negotiation, I think poses a bit of a challenge to NICE's prized role as being a non-political actor in this space. Also, I think going to be really interesting is how NICE is going to work alongside but outside the EU's harmonised HTA approach. That remains to be seen. So there are huge challenges across the world in relation to health technology assessment, and we'll now move to your questions. Hussein is going to be monitoring the questions from the online audience, but let's take some in the room first. If you could introduce yourself, wait for the roving mic first, and then when you get the roving mic, please introduce yourself before you ask your questions. So we've got one at the front here, please. Have a microphone here.
Hi, my name is Viren Mahurkar. I've been in the pharmaceutical industry for several years, and I'm also a finance investment banker by background, currently doing doctoral research here at the LSE. So my question is actually what you just said a minute ago kind of is directly related to that. One of the things that I find in bodies such as the ICER or NICE, or I assume about ICWIG, I don't really know much about ICWIG, is that there isn't really a sort of what in economics you would call a general equilibrium understanding of what these rules and procedures will do to innovation at the national level of the economy. And while you said that trade policy should stand outside the remit, but from society's perspective, so its expertise should also go into whether a particular policy encourages or discourages innovation. I'm not just talking about a manufacturer's innovation or not, I'm talking about innovation in the economy. I'd love to hear from all of you, whether these, how far these go in. I know that in ISO you mentioned that that's part of the remit, but I didn't really understand how that goes in. So that's my question, and whether there is this general equilibrium understanding of innovation in the economy. I'm not merely talking about innovation for that particular manufacturer or pricing of the product of that particular manufacturer. Thank you.
Who would like to go first?
Sure. I mentioned innovation. Well, I don't know how satisfying this would be. The question is there consideration? I think the way the farmer, at least in the U.S., as we think about it, oftentimes, we've had comments about the fact that we're doing this, we are almost messing with maybe perhaps what you're saying in terms of let the market just bear itself and in terms of what it is. But the reality of it is the pharmaceutical and the way we pay for it does not behave as a perfect market, right? When we think about drugs, the payer is different from the buyer, unlike how the normal market in other places will sort of operate and things will work out itself, right? Because I go to a shop to buy a car. I'm the buyer and I'm the payer, and if I like it, if we like more drugs, and then if we like more car, and maybe the prices go down and it impacts that. But when it comes to this, it's not a perfect market. I'm the patient, but it's someone else that pays for it. And so it's hard for it to sort of follow that general rule of economics. And one thing we say at ICER is, I think to flip the coin, the other side is, what do we think it's doing to innovation when we continue to go at this very skyrocketing when we think in terms of prices. And we believe that if we pay for value, there's a way in which we still reward innovation in a way that we give incentive for that to continue. Recently, I think people were shocked when ISA said a new treatment for MLD that cost about $4 million. We said it's cost effective because of all the downstream costs of it.
Yes, if I could add that maybe in Germany, the assessment of drugs specifically has elements that support certain types of drugs specifically. For example, there are specific rules for orphan drugs. There are specific rules for antibiotics. So that is kind of factored in. We also, so far, still don't have a so-called force hurdle. So any new treatment that is approved by EMA is immediately reimbursed at a price set by the manufacturer. That certainly is a policy element in this assessment procedure. However, also for the reasons already mentioned, I don't see this immediate connection between the assessment and innovation. And we also had a report by an expert council in healthcare this year in Germany, which also again clarified that health policy should not be coupled to innovation policy, that actually innovation can be supported otherwise by tax exempts, by a good workforce and things like that. So there are other factors to innovation than accepting inefficient treatments in healthcare.
Yeah, and I think the depoliticisation of NICE, I think that might be what you're getting at. I'd said is, I mean, obviously innovation is a central plank of UK medicines policy. There's no doubt about that, and maybe that's as it should be. I think that the depoliticised NICE as a sort of depoliticised body, I think, has been very helpful in lots of ways because in the olden days, actions could be brought against the Secretary of State for Health for funding choices. Whereas if you have an arm's length body doing that based on evidence, you take the political heat out of those funding decisions, and that can be helpful all around. There's a lady here.
Thank you. No, thank you for the information presentations, very interesting. Being very new to this, as I'm Katrine Pinsness, I just started this week at the HIPM program, so this might be a bit beyond that, but otherwise I'm medical advisor in a humanitarian organization, and because of that I'm wondering, do these cost-benefit research, does that also extend into the preparedness domain? And I realize preparedness will of course be quite dependent on your risk assessment, but I'm thinking specifically medications and medical countermeasures. If you take, for instance, the domain of CBRN and you combine the fact that you often don't have a lot of evidence for some of those medications and then the costs of storage and uncertainty of the event happening, I was just wondering whether this is something that you look at as well. Thank you.
So first of all, the regulation is focusing with regard to medicinal products on the approval process at EMA. So all the drugs that are submitted for approval need to be assessed. And if, for example, if there is a drug that in principle could also be used for prevention or preparation, then this would be assessed. However, I'm not entirely sure whether all the factors that should go into that consideration would go into the assessment. That might be a different part of the assessment which would need to be defined separately.
Do you have anything you want to add? Great. We've got a question in the back at the middle, and I don't know whether you have some online that you want to share us a bit. So we've got a question.
Yeah,
please.
Thank you. My name is Seb, and thank you for the really interesting discussion. I think my question is a bit more geared towards Dr. Wiesler. Just a bit of background on myself. I work with IQVIA on HTA strategy, and we've actually started receiving quite a few JCA dossiers. And we've debated as well, like as you mentioned in your presentation, the JCA dossier and the final report, countries, it's not mandatory for countries to use them. They still hold pricing and reimbursements at national level. Are there any formal mechanisms planned on actually assessing how countries use the evidence? And is that something that you've debated internally of actually assessing, okay, is this actually realizing those efficiencies of reducing duplication of effort? And as you said, it might be an ongoing discussion, but I was curious to see if there's any formal mechanisms ongoing.
Yes, indeed. Maybe let me first say, we do want to use these reports. We are not doing that for the fun of it. Yeah, I mean, it has been very intense work over the past years. It has been prepared even before the regulation for quite some time. We see the need of this avoidance of duplication, and we have done a substantial upfront investment to enable this, and we want to use these reports. But there also is a formal mechanism for an evaluation that is laid down in the regulation. So already by end of 27, member states will have to produce first reports on the use of the JCAs, and there will be an analysis by the Commission on the outcome of these first procedures, and then there will even be a discussion on maybe adjustments to the regulation. So there is a formal mechanism to evaluate that and to potentially improve any outcomes if we are not yet there.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions online? Oh, you wanted to say something?
No.
Do you have any questions? Maybe
Yes.
take a couple online just together, and then we've got 3 in the room, and we'll try and get through all of those.
So I think you've partly answered this, Beate, but there was a question around the extent to which you expect JCA to reduce duplication in HTA processes in European countries. And a question for both of you is around HTA reassessment. Once you've done the initial access decision recommendation, under what circumstances should we be thinking about repeating that? What may be some conditions for doing that?
Yeah. And that's always a big question because HT is a snapshot of time, and often we're doing it very early as where the drug is coming to market. And so what we've done at ICER is there's situations where we've done reassessment when there's been significant new evidence that we think would really change what our recommendation would look like. Right now we're redoing an evaluation of GLP-1s for obesity. We just completed that, but we had done that a year ago. But there were new drugs and there were new clinical evidence of clinical benefit that just came out, and it felt really important for us to redo a reassessment. The other thing ICER does, I mentioned this during my presentation, recognizing that we cannot always reassess every drug. Like I said, we're a relatively small organization. What we do is to provide our model, ICE Analytics, we make it available in a platform, especially in situations where there's uncertainty at the time where we're doing it. We create the model in a way that the user who subscribes for it, as evidence become more certain, can toggle that. What the efficacy estimate is, and some of the assumptions that we have made in building it. So in a sense, we are leaving it to the users of the HTA, including the payers and the manufacturers, perhaps, who now want to argue that there's a new trial that shows that the benefit is better than what ICER had incorporated at the start of our review. So that's what we have in place for reassessment.
Yes, maybe first to reassessment. Yes, in principle, also the European procedure plans for reassessment, but that is not no automatism. So it would need a dedicated decision by the coordination group to start a reassessment, and one reason to do that would be new evidence that is relevant to an extent that this assessment should be redone. So that is laid down in the regulation. With regard to deduplication, yes, I do think that it will save resources. I mean, if we look at the PICO exercises, and unfortunately you still don't know how the PICO exercises in the 10 or the PICO definitions in the 10 procedures we already did were going. I mean, we didn't come up with 27 PICOs. We came up with a larger number, yeah. I think the maximum was 16, I'm afraid. But I would still expect some convergence on that over time, yeah. When member states understand also what their flexibilities are in agreeing on maybe slight changes to the national requirements, which then enables further consolidation of the PICOs. And for example, in Germany, we have also adapted our procedure in that any health technology developer who submits for the German procedure obviously doesn't have to submit the data for the German research question again. It's just by reference to the European dossier. So this, of course, is the intended deduplication.
Thank you. I'm going to round up, I think, probably three final questions, and then you can give your answer to them. So you're first.
Thanks so much. Hi, I'm Mohini. I work at HM Treasury on life sciences policy and medicine spending. My question was for both of you about your views on factoring in broader societal economic benefits as part of cost effectiveness assessments. So thinking specifically about how certain drugs might reduce economic inactivity, for example. And I was wondering specifically if ICER factors any economic benefits into the assessments that you make.
Hold that thought. We're going to try and round up some more questions. So you're next, and then... yes, please. Please?
Hi, thank you for your presentations. They have been quite insightful. My
Could
question...
you hold it close to you?
Sorry, should I start again?
No, just carry on.
My question is towards Dr. Weisler, and it's about IQWIG has been very clear about prioritizing patient-related outcomes such as overall survival and quality of life. But given the increasing reliance on surrogate endpoints, particularly in oncology, do you think the upcoming EU JCA should adopt a stricter, more standardized definition on what counts as a truly patient-related outcome?
And then you, please, and we'll squeeze you in if we can. So if you could hand it behind. Yes, please.
Okay, this is perfect as my question relates to the last one. I'm Dimitri, I'm a student here, but I'm also an employee of Bristol Myers Squibb. So I think, Dr. Agbula, you referred to decreasing quality in evidence or uncertainty in the evidence provided, but I would argue there are certain cases where a level of uncertainty is unavoidable, right? If your survival curve is very long, which is great, right? But it makes it difficult to generate overall survival data, or if you have crossover in your trial, or if your patient population is very small, right? So in such cases, shouldn't HTA bodies be more flexible, not less? And if not, does that not also have a cost, which is the health gains foregone, right? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to squeeze in one more, and then you can give your final word.
Okay,
yes,
great. Thanks very much. Really excellent presentations, and congratulations again on the lab. So I'm Lombe Kasonde. I'm a senior health specialist with the World Bank, and I'm responsible for pharmaceutical policy. So I obviously work in very different settings, but this is equally enlightening. My question is to ICER, which is around the two types of payers, public and private. So it was interesting to hear that the EU member states can decide what recommendations they choose and whether they restrict reimbursement, for instance, or limit based on budget impact. Would ICER also be able to stagger recommendations in such a way that public payers can choose one aspect and private payers can maybe go beyond? And I say that specifically because thinking about the shift in the products that we are going to be financing in our geographies, trying to understand what the modularity modality should be in terms of recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. So who would like to go first in answering any of those? You don't have to do all four, each of you. We don't have time for that, but just the last thoughts.
Okay, all right, great. The first question was around broader societal benefit, and yes, we do. Oftentimes, usually when we do a model, We build it from both a health system perspective and societal perspective. And so we always have those two perspectives in our report. But I think, like I mentioned during my presentation, we also recognize that sometimes there are things that cannot fully be quantified. But we ensure that that is still reflected in how we describe things. But usually we have those two perspectives in our models. And should we be more flexible for certain conditions? And you asked, which is, yes, that is true. I would say that the regulatory system does that for us in terms of bringing a lot of flexibility to how these drugs are approved. Should HTA be more flexible? I would say at this point, it's almost like we don't have a choice. Because the regulatory body is more flexible, we have to do with the evidence we have in being able to answer those questions. And yes, there may be a cost if we don't think about that flexibility, but there's also a cost oftentimes when we are making recommendation and working with uncertain evidence. And I will give an example. 2 years ago, we reviewed a drug, a new drug for ALS that was approved by the FDA based on phase 2 trial. And this drug was approved. This is a serious condition with great unmet need. When ICER did that report, we highlighted a lot of uncertainty in the clinical evidence. We suspect there are issues around blinding here. But it does appear that, wow, this drug seems to have actually a prolonged life for patients that have ALS. That's a big deal. We did exploratory analysis, and we gave a recommendation of what the price should be based on the evidence. Of course, the manufacturer priced like ×5 of ICER's recommendation. A few months later, or a year later, phase 3 result came out, and the drug failed. But as a society, we had spent millions of dollars on the drug that doesn't work. And so there is a cost to making all of these recommendations too for us as a society. And think about the opportunity cost of all of those. And should we stagger our recommendations? I would say, again, we don't have formal authority. We sort of just say what is cost effective, and then we have a set of policy recommendations to payers. And many times in our policy recommendations, we have policy recommendations that may make sense for private payers and some for public payers. And so yes, we include that as we make recommendations in our report.
Thank you. Beata.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first one is easy for me because the European system doesn't do cost effectiveness analysis, so the societal points cannot be considered. With regard to the question of surrogates versus patient-relevant endpoints and at what level the European system should work, actually the regulation is very clear in that it first says it should meet member states' needs, so it's again a decision at the member states which endpoint they want to put forward. Our guidance on endpoints says it should be clinical endpoints, it should be patient-relevant endpoints, but very often at the European level, I think we will see surrogates, just because they are brought forward by member states who, for example, have force hurdles. Then it's easier for Germany to say we don't work on surrogates when the drug is on the market anyway, and it's only about price. And the regulation also is very clear in that it says endpoints shouldn't be ranked, so it's completely neutral about the endpoints, the European regulation. With regard to the question whether we should be more flexible on poor evidence, I absolutely agree with everything you have said. I would rather like to concentrate on decreasing the uncertainty. I think we have by no means done all we could do to decrease the uncertainty. Also in these situations you were referring to, also in smaller population, I think we can do much better studies. Also in these situations, it always seems to be easy. We seem to go down the easy road, say, oh, it's difficult, and therefore we don't do it. We just have to be more flexible. I think we by no means have done what we could do to decrease uncertainty there, because in the end, it's and this also comes down to your point on are we kind of hampering innovation. in the end, HTA bodies are working in a system that is responsible for sustainable healthcare. In Europe, we want to have universal healthcare, and that takes some effort. Yeah, but that is the goal we want to achieve. Sorry for that, unfortunately. We don't want to end up in a situation the US is in. And that is an effort, and that doesn't allow at certain points for flexibility. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those really fascinating presentations, really informative, insightful, and for that rigorous conversation that we're starting to have, which I hope we can continue during the reception just outside. So thanks so much to our speakers, Beate, Felucia, and Emily for doing this. Thank you for your engagement.